deal. Bye. Welcome to Speak with Eve. I am your host, Eve Eurydice, and today's guest is Kevin Walton. Kevin is the founder of Creatorhood. He's a transformation specialist and activational speaker. He works with women, men, and children on embodiment. And I want to focus today's conversation on the crisis of manhood and masculinity, which is something we've all been made aware of. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I heard that you just got back from this convergence, 7 generations of sacred sons, which is a group I'd like to know more about. I know that it's one of the growing kind of like international, movements of men getting together and having, contact and relation, right? And nowadays, men often have to, pay and take initiative, right, and travel just to access the kind of like embodied behavior that our ancestors, lived in, or day and night, their entire lives, which is interesting. Yeah. So I'd love to hear more about that, if we could start there.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that acknowledgement of it. So the event that we had, the Convergence, is it was the central event that sparked the Sacred Sons movement. And it's an annual event we have. We did a few, or we do twice a year. This one in particular, though, was a really special one for us, as it was our 7th annual event of this magnitude. And every year it just kept growing bigger and bigger. So with this one, we had over 400 men together in a space for just 4 days of transformative work, of brotherhood, of community. Sacred Sons, what we kind of created as an organization, is a space where men can really come, bringing everything they got with them to be held in the space that wouldn't be judged, but would definitely be met and called forward and called in ways that are supportive for all the men to meet their edge in whatever way that may be, whether that be emotionally, mentally, physically, but really dedicated to the comprehensive being of a man. And for this one, as 7, we brought in the generational aspect of our community and brotherhood. So one of our dear brothers, Trevor, he initiated the Sacred Sons Youth program. So for this Convergence, which was normally just reserved for adults and young men, we brought in another facet where we had the youth having their own convergence within the bigger Convergence. And we did a really beautiful opening ceremony where the young men, the boys that came entering into this journey, their fathers or a father figure, if their fathers were not there, kind of held space for this rite of passage of letting go of that dynamic to step into their own experience. And so we had that facet involved in this Convergence. And then the young men coming back in from their journey over the past 4 days, taking this step towards being young men, and then reigniting in the closing ceremony with their fathers and with the other men of the larger group. And then we also did one acknowledging the elders, and the elders, for all the ways that we've had to in our culture now in this generation, assume the mantle of leadership of bringing rites of passage back, of establishing certain things for us, which is what the dedication that we have and hold in Sacred Sons. We did a ceremony where the elders, whom either have already been in leadership or are honoring our step toward it, did a ceremony of offering that recognition of responsibility we've now placed on our shoulders to kind of lead this wave and this movement and this energy of healthy male embodiment and a healthy dynamic of masculine and feminine within the male archetype. Mm-hmm. And that's been our dedication of this journey and what it's really represented for us in this way. And so Convergence is just a really massive event held in that heart space. Mm-hmm. And it was just so powerful. So powerful.
And that took place in the Appalachian Mountains somewhere, right?
Yeah, in the Smoky Mountains in North Carolina. Yep, exactly. And which was such a beautiful landscape as well to hold that in.
And the young boys, what are the ages? From
11 to 19.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. So it's like preteen onward, yeah. Well, I mean,
exactly.
I think that it's it's an interesting moment we're living in because for the past I'm going to say 60, 70 years, right? So much has changed. And men find themselves without a clear definition of what their position, their job in society is, And I think that with patriarchy, there was a separation between the sexes, right? So what we came to call the classic separation, there's nothing classic about it. It was enforced, but nevertheless, it began symbolically, let's say, with the fall from nature, the fall from Eden into civilization, which was the patriarchy, which kind of separated, right, men from women and forced that for all kinds of reasons, that had to do with, procreation, really. And I think now that is no longer needed. Paternity tests and IVFs and serial marriages and, gay marriage and all of the changes. And the draft, right? So there is no longer it's no longer obligatory, to go to the army, which was a rite of passage, from in my country, young men still have to go. They don't like it, but they have to go and they have a year or two in the company only of men doing physical exercises away. It's the first time they're away from home, away from their moms, right? They're all of them put together, regardless of socioeconomic backgrounds, education, and whatnot. So all of that kind of ended in America abruptly, I think. And that's how we find ourselves in this place where there is trauma. There's a massive collective trauma stuck in the nervous system of men, and they feel repressed in a sense and depleted because what is their formative role? And then you have the whole conversation with about toxic masculinity, and all of that has pervaded into the culture without giving men en masse, right? All men, a positive alternative understanding of what man is needed for, what man's contribution.
Yeah, I think there's a huge lack of awareness in relation to embodiment as a species that we kind of underwent, and I think that when we lack a greater connection to source, to God in our awareness, and then we play out a far greater dissociative relationship with ourselves, it starts to play out into everything. And one of the things I teach in the practice of creativehood is there's not so much a toxic anything, not a toxic person or toxic medicine or toxic enemy, but there's misalignments left unchecked that just get louder and louder until you have to address them. And the misalignments left unchecked to me is the idea of being a patriarch or a matriarch holds a certain nodal point of responsibility and referential tone that, if misaligned, is dictated by the misalignment. And I think that's what happened a lot in America as it developed as a nation. It was built on misalignment, and nothing checked the misalignment, so it just kept spilling. You know what I mean? And for all the ways that it just wasn't also in America, because that was all still a side effect of a lot of different cultures in the scheme of life. And I think for all the ways that we, especially as men, felt disconnected within our own beingness, not knowing how to identify and process emotions, not knowing how to feel and process ourselves in relation to a lot of different factors. The part of the masculine principle of energy is that side of us that is assertive and aggressive and action oriented and achievement oriented. And if that is on nonstop without the connection of the intuitive side, emotional side, receptive sides, gentle side, that is the aspect of the feminine principle, then you get a lopsided civilization that perpetuates that distortion.
The reason for the current crisis, let's call it, is that we are a society in transition, right? So our collective, like, social programming in each one of us runs like 85% of our actions, right? And the rest is free choice, maybe. Maybe it's even more, but in any case, it's huge. But we are moving away from what we feminists anyway used to call patriarchy, and into a future, and it's been now happening, right? So there are all kinds of different ways to describe this change, but pretty much a lot of us agree that it's a time of transition. So
for sure,
that creates
and a transition to something that's more harmonious, where it's like, because I if you trace history, there's been a lot of different cultures where there have been like a constant back and forth between matriarchy, patriarchy, and right now we've been living a really misaligned aspect of certain things patriarchically, and what we're moving into in the future is a more harmonious way of being, where we recognize there isn't a battle. You know what I mean? There isn't a battle between
yeah, exactly.
It's like the unification of us all, and we are definitely in that transition period. So like anything that's in contradiction to that or misaligned to that is stands out to us more and becomes more magnified, because we are moving into that more harmonious, unified way of being. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so.
The system that we've lived in oppresses men and women the same, right? So I think that one of the misunderstandings or falsehoods about patriarchy is that it's the patriarchs are in charge, right? Or like men are in charge. And I think that's very false. It has nothing to do with gender, first of all. There are plenty of female-bodied, people who have been patriarchs. The patriarchy is a system that oppresses men and women alike. And in a sense, I think that it oppresses men even more, because when women do become pregnant and give birth, they somewhat experience their connection with nature, right? They get a break from this like stranglehold of culture. Whereas men at that time are like pushed even deeper in the jail of patriarchy, because the wages of manhood are like procreative debt, right? So patriarchy, controls men by training them to think that they have to pay. They have to pay for their emotions, pay for having a child, pay for having a faithful partner. So in a sense, it controls men harder, I think, than women, and it damages men even more, because they never get out. Right? So they're not supposed to feel without money. They're not, the transactionality, in our like sexual and romantic relations, in our intimate relations, in our generational, connection, I think is like the corrupt heart of this system, right? So, and I feel that it's time for men to understand, that it's the idea that patriarchy implants in them that they are in debt, right? They're indebted, right? So it's like an existential insecurity, where,
I think it's,
you're not worthy of love or loyalty, or
unless you
children of your own, unless you can pay for it. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, the idea of thinking that what defines you as a man is how much you can provide, and if you're not providing, you're not doing it. You're not being a man is a huge distortion. Even though the idea of being a provider, like wanting to provide and accomplish, is an aspect of the masculine principle, thinking that that's all that defines you as a man has been a huge distortion, for sure. And
also, let's separate providing from protecting. It's one thing to like, make shelter or want to look after, or protect. But the providing part means that man has to leave, right, the family unit, and go where he can make money, right? So there is a big difference.
That's one of the that's one of the concepts too. The distortion of thinking what it meant to be a man was to sacrifice, right? Like to sacrifice your family, and we we watch cultures teach that if you to love is to sacrifice, when love isn't sacrifice at all. Love is a dedication. Love is the fullness of us. Wherever we're being loved, we're bringing the fullness of us. We don't ever lose in love. We aren't experiencing scarcity in love. And love isn't even something you have to fight for. It is something that you must live into and embody. And I think when it comes to the idea of being a man and restoring healthy dynamics about that, it's really understanding the nature of presence. Because I think about that now when there's so much more research, being done and results, realizing just how invaluable and impactful a father's or man's presence is in the development of a child. So where before all men were like, well, I just work and put food on the table and clothes on your back and all that stuff. But there is a emotional component and a connective component to us being there that's vital in a child's development. And part of this disassociated conditioning that we place upon ourselves in relation to these narratives was huge in the distortion that led to either experiencing that there were not as many fathers in the household, especially within the Black community, or that if the fathers were there in any culture, that there was a certain emotional and mental component involved in their presence, just as much as the notion of providing, that one isn't sacrificed for the other. And I think that notion of thinking that they always got to pay, or that basing everything on transaction, is a huge distortion, that we think we have to exchange one thing for the other, and not realizing the overall setup and the way that we condition ourselves in relation to that was a huge distortion that perpetuated a lot of what we're now working through as a species and as a society, for sure.
Right, exactly. I agree with you. Yeah. I mean, and it's so widespread, that men are, very generally speaking, culturally selected, in the sense of men who are wealthy or perceived as being wealthy, are more popular as whatever, parents, fathers, mates, right? So, I mean, in a sense, how can men then trust, the authenticity of their partner's love, right? So, and I feel that is what is pushing us even further from embodiment. The fact that men can buy allegiance and buy like family, and buy what the appearance of obedience, right? Actually emasculates them, because it keeps them, enslaved to this system. Like, they may not feel that they're enslaved to their partners, those who don't, but they definitely feel enslaved to the system. Yeah,
even though that is
having
also
jobs and having, making money. Because if you don't make that money, and if you don't show that you have that money, you're not going to get the partners. And then, many men, once the woman has a child, also feel like the woman has to come first, because after all, it was her body. She did the hard work of pregnancy and labor and birth and breastfeeding, right? And so it puts men in a place of, a feeling of like secondary place, at least until the child is a little older. So it creates a sense of, happy wife, happy life. Keep your wife happy so she doesn't, complain.
At the expense of your own well-being.
Right, right.
Which is like...
And who are you in the end? Who are you?
Yeah, exactly. And that denial of the self really is the idea of the emasculation that's happened. And what people don't realize is that we all do this to ourselves, right? We all condition ourselves. We all, from the awareness that we're in. And I think about that also with my son. Like, I was very much immensely involved in his life from the start, and it was clear to me that connection was felt, and I was very much in there from jump, and we have a really powerful relationship in that space. And so when I think about even the notion of, even though early on there is the breastfeeding for the mother and certain things, the man can actually have a very intrinsic role through that entire process, and I did for my son. And that's the other thing, is even reorienting and recalibrating even that process. Like there's a process that men can be so much more involved right from the start. And there's a misconception about it. And just as you expressed now, like this notion, because one of the things I always teach is, especially when it comes to relational dynamics, is that you want to choose synergy over compromise, right? Every relationship thrives better if you're always looking to see how you meet each other fully in contribution to the whole you're a part of, rather than someone always has to win, someone always has to lose. There's got to be a compromise, because that always ends up leading to resentment and denial of self. And that's one of the biggest things we struggle with in relationships, and why even people get into relationships in denying themselves, and why we have divorce rates so high, and different aspects that are a tribute to these containers and what you're expressing. It's this really big wake up call for us as men, and even for women, and even for everyone in whatever label they go by, the recognition of just how important it is to be in connection with the self, to be in connection to the things you're a part of, and it not come, your contribution not come at the cost of yourself and well-being, but come in extension of, so that it becomes that we all understand how to live in the sweet spot of the fullness of the self, the authenticness of the self, rather than selflessness or selfishness, so that, because both of those are misalignments. So we live in the actual, and what we're guiding, especially with men, towards and creating these rites of passage, is so that they understand the importance of ensuring you're taking care of yourself, not sacrificing yourself, but you're also showing up in that leader role, in that guardian role, in that presence that's necessary to hold a container the way we're designed, which has just been kind of like, there's been, when I think about the journey of just in my own life and the history over decades, it's like you see glimpses of it, but not the full out comprehensive sustainable embodiment. And then you see, as we evolve, the greater spiritual connection that is bringing another aspect of it online that's designed to meet where some of the ancient ways of being still support it. And that's where we find ourselves harmonizing in this new stage of life that is bringing on the understanding of this greater spiritual awareness with the foundational practices. And this is where we look to land and develop, that men can then begin to mature more appropriately, and women the same. And then we all start to meet each other far more harmoniously and far more embodied. And then being able to even raise children that way. And obviously it applies to every dynamic, whether it be same-sex relationships, transgender relationships, because in every respect, someone's always going to be more masculine-led and someone's going to be more feminine-led, because it's a natural relatability, even though we have both in us, that we're living in the harmony of. And that is part of this evolution of us. And that awareness of ensuring we don't deny ourselves is a really big key in that.
Yeah, I do want to say that even though you sound optimistic and positive, I just do want to point out that at the same time, culture is going further and further away, is being removed from embodiment by promoting, virtual reality, AI, overconsumption, which keeps us away from ourselves, from each other, and stuck in our little, separate little pods, right, with all of our electronics.
But I don't see that as
video games. I mean, there's like an overabundance of marketing, which incentivizes us to stay away from our bodies and kind of more, trapped in our minds. So that happens at the same time.
Yeah, but that's how marketing works. It's marketing only works when you lack self-awareness, and because technology is advanced so fast.
Right.
That's our invitation in consciousness, is that we evolve to match it in our self-awareness. And for me, it's not so much being positive or optimistic. I just live empowered, and I know I'm witnessing in my own world more people evolving in self-awareness. That is the antidote to the notion of the hyper capitalistic, sell. You're not enough without this. You're not enough without this. Focus on this. Focus on this. Where if you, myself, and everyone who's on the same trajectory we're on, we all are a part of the wave of light that is living into greater self-awareness and consciousness. So And to do that doesn't mean we don't acknowledge what's happening, right? Like, to me, it's not so much a positive or negative viewpoint. It's the empowered viewpoint where you look at the whole picture and then you know what's possible. And for me, that's what I always speak to is, yes, these things are happening and it's important to acknowledge them. And then what do you do with that information? And so that the trajectory is always moving towards what's possible, not what are we going to do? You know what I mean? It's like that, like really can I continue in that way because it is, these are things that we're creating and there are things there, and we have to ensure that consciousness is evolving at the pace technology is.
Well, for me, I think, I think men need to disconnect from, the generational wealth imperative. For example, a lot of these like stories, like, why don't women bear the householder burden and let men off the financial hook, right? And become the householders, and then men's job can be what they want. For example, raising their kids, participating in the family unit. So I really think that we cannot be equal as long as, men are expected to be the ones paying. And I think that feminism kind of like failed to separate, sex from money, in the most basic ways. And that's why we've, devolved in this time where we have like reenactments of, patriarchal relations, which, whether it's like the sugar baby culture or, a lot of like the online dating and, older men, much younger woman. I mean, you can look around you and it's just everywhere, right? And I think that is a failing in our, general understanding of what is best for women, right? Which I understand as the job of feminism. But I think that,
well, if it's aligned, if it's aligned, because I noticed that, just like anything, you can have the alignment or misalignment. Like feminism aligned supports the harmony of humanity, because it recognizes women's capabilities and contribution as just as powerfully as men's. But then the misaligned side of it is the constant divisiveness of like, we don't need men, we don't need you, and then there's that perpetuation. So I think that, and I think the when I think of the relational dynamic of humanity, when I've worked with a ton of individuals and like thousands of individuals and couples, and when I think of all the work that happens, you see kind of it's not so much necessarily maybe replacing the roles of what men do or what women do. I think it's really understanding what people feel called to, because I know a lot of men that love playing their role and a lot of women that love playing a certain role in family, and they love it. But I also know comprehensive men that do both. And I'm being one of them, where I have my business and the things I run, but I'm very much dedicated to my son's life and very much dedicated to that aspect. But I also love building things and creating things and moving ways forward. And I think for the relational dynamic of how we evolve, understanding the relational dynamics where men and women can dance in the flow of masculine and feminine together, and that knowing how to be in harmony with both inside of us keeps us knowing how to dance between both within relational dynamics all the time. But there's still an interesting natural gravitation towards certain dynamics. But if everyone is playing their part fully, all you're doing is experiencing love and power. Because what I teach in my practice when it comes to masculine and feminine, power is life force energy, which means that power is actually the relationship of both masculine and feminine, right? Because, you hear a lot of concepts of it being like powerful men, but really the power is both, the love is both, and presence is both. So when I think of the dynamic, I think where you do have men now who are far more involved in their children's lives, that also still work, but you also have women that work and also still love doing certain things. And I think the recognition of just how much we're all in this together and how much we can support one another has been the biggest missing component in every facet. When I think about couples that are like, well, I'm always doing this, and but they never just stopped to have a conversation about where they are and how they can support each other. And that little tweak creates a whole different dynamic. And part of like men becoming more embodied is their ability to know how to tune into their own feminine aspects, is knowing how to identify and process emotions, and then is knowing what to do with them. which is also still true for women.
Which is very hard. It's very hard.
And that's, yeah, well, I mean, hard or not, we still got to do it. It's like, it's just got to be done.
It's very hard for men because from a very, very young age, from boyhood, they're encouraged not to have emotions or suppress their emotions, and that their emotions that in women or girls would be encouraged in them are discouraged as weakness. So it's very hard.
Exactly.
The same
well,
way
but I'll tell you, it's easier than you think. Doing the work that we do. Yeah, exactly. Like doing the work that we do in Sacred Sons and what I've done in the Light Beings, it's like once people actually recognize, especially men, when they realize they actually have a safe container to do it, it actually comes really fast because they've been wanting it. We just didn't feel safe enough to do it. If we establish, like with Sacred Sons and with Light Beings, that's all it took. It took just literally establishing a container, and it comes pouring through. But the hard part is men's willingness to speak out, right? Like when I think about some of the men who've shown up in for Sacred Sons, we've been around for 4 years now, and when I think about now the way men are flooding in. And what it just took a few times that they're like, I kept seeing your guys' stuff and I watched it once and I watched it again. And then finally I was like, I just got to do this. And so it's like that part, getting over that initial hump of I got to do this is the biggest struggle for men. Mm-hmm. But once they're in it, it's like, it's way easier than people realize. And that's also one of the reasons why I'm so hype about it all is because creating the container, you see how quickly it can happen, even though I'm not disillusioned in understanding building a society along these lines.
That's right.
Will take time.
Yeah, that's right.
Will take time.
And the numbers, sure. Like you have 400 men there. The numbers, of the billions.
Yeah, exactly. There's however many billions on the planet. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like 400. That's great, and there's still more.
There's so many more.
It's like and so we just gotta keep going.
Yeah, exactly. Unless we keep, like basically dedicating every moment of our day to this, to spreading this kind of changed consciousness, to undoing the brainwashing that goes on all the time, right? On TV, in movies, in ads, like everywhere you think and you look, in algorithms, it doesn't matter. In mainstream culture, like feminists say, mainstream culture is all masculine, which it is. But it is not pro-men masculine, right? It is not. It is masculinized in a way that simply, asks asks women as well as men, everyone basically, regardless of gender, which gender now barely exists anymore. But it asks everyone to function as men would in the labor force, in the marketplace. But beyond that. Everything around us is like this fragile, points out to this like fragile manhood stuff, which didn't exist 30, 40 years ago. You see what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think but I know that what's interesting too about it is the same way there's certain aspects for men to develop or us to develop our own masculine aspects. I think about the same with women where, as little girls, it's like recognized, right? Where girls feel their emotions, women feel their emotions, but they're not always taught what to do with that energy, and so I think about that. So like emotional intelligence has been probably one of the biggest missing components of our upbringing for everybody. And and so where men have to know how to even start feeling to then know how to channel it properly. Women feeling freely were never taught how to guide it in a certain way. So then you have both aspects missing a portion of themselves, and then reflecting to each other the missing piece, and then everyone judging each other for what they're reflecting to each other.
You're right. Yeah.
When I think about a mainstream society, what's interesting, especially in Western culture, women actually drive the market. With which is an interesting thing. But I agree with you that. When there's a lot of either hyper masculine presentation in mainstream or hyper masculine judgment, like which is what you're speaking to, I think, it's an interesting thing because you get, as a man, you get mixed signals, and I think that's also part of the missing component of women's self-awareness, where you feel this energy, but don't always know how to describe it. So on one end, it's like we like to see men being men more. It's like, but then you just be, it's like show some softness, and it's like, well, men are like, I don't understand. Is it this or is it that? And they're like in this space.
Yeah,
whereas,
exactly.
Because
it's like the ecosystem.
Because what was missing was the comprehensive.
There is nothing. There is no comprehensive anything. Everything is so fragmented,
Exactly. And life is designed to be lived comprehensively. So that's where we got to be able to take it.
Yes.
100%.
And I think that, we're that's partly because we are in transition. So we're like caught between past and future. I hear women all the time say, oh, I really want a masculine man and I want men to act like a man. But then if the man acts that way, it's like, why are you, such a cliche, why can't you understand me? Why? And then, of course, a real man would would take me shopping. What? A real man would, it's just all so distorted. And I think that what it does, it throws dust in people's eyes so they can't see the big picture because they're constantly being bombarded with these disparate, contradictory definitions of what is a man. And we don't know, what would you say is a man, other than a person who provides for others and takes care of others?
Yeah, well,
what is a man?
Yeah, for sure. To me, a man, because I have very specific definitions for all this stuff, including what a woman is. But for a man, is the archetypical reference point for the harmony of masculine and feminine in an embodied being that leans towards the masculine contribution. And so what I mean by that is, as being a man, if I'm living comprehensively, first and foremost, that means I'm in touch with my masculine and feminine relational dynamic in my being, which means I understand how to identify, feel, process, and utilize. So then if that's the case, then I show up in the world in that capacity of presence and self-awareness that I understand what I am responsible for. I understand how to ensure that my playfulness stays intact, and I'm very much involved in what supports a culture, civilization, species evolving, what I would say optimally, which really represents effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability. And so when I think about a man's role in that, I could play with the trajectory of those concepts in every facet, from a family to a romantic relationship, to father-child, to community role and leader, and so part of that movement-based trajectory and structural dedication, that is part of the pillar that upholds being embodied as a man. Even though the aspects that actually support that properly would be the inclusion of the feminine. And when I think of, for me, key responsibilities that I hold in relation to that, that makes sense for me is that all the things that reflect me living a fuller, authentic life. And for me, I love being able to provide for my family, friends, and community. But I don't base my life on it, right? So I don't define my worth as a man, whether I'm doing that. I just love doing that, right? I love spending time with my son. I love, and so part of, for me, is recognizing choice. And obviously that's what I teach in my practice, is understanding the way that we condition ourselves to know how to become more self-aware, to live more conscious with the decisions we make, with the roles we play, with the commitments and responsibilities we hold. And to me, that's an aspect of being a man, is the awareness of the necessary structure and foundation and the ability to move the narrative and energy of life forward. And then being able to do that in harmony means I'm also intact emotionally, mentally, physically, and especially spiritually, which is the foundation of everything. And those are some, and I think about the rites of passage for boys and manhood into that. And I think there's very specific things involved. I think it's important for boys to have a form of physical confrontation that's structured and disciplined for them to constantly meet where they're at physically. And I think it helps to do it within other community members. So either be other men or boys, and especially with their father figure at different stages, so they can start to understand where their trajectory is and how they measure up in their own embodiment. I think another rite of passage is important is a portion of time spent celibate so that men learn what sexual energy actually is and how to be in command of it. And then another one would be the taking on personal responsibility so that they develop the ability to understand choice and consequence. And what happens if you don't honor commitments and be in integrity with those. And then another one is being able to contribute to something beyond yourself. And I think if we were to create a reference point as a culture that ensured those 4 rites of passages were on, you'd see a massive upsurge of healthy masculine embodiment in the development of men in our culture, that we could continue to build upon in that role of our society and nation.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, to me, it goes back to like Socrates, my ancestor, right? Know thyself. And how do you know thyself? Well, you need to, this is what we're talking about, developing consciousness. You need to take time
100%.
off, whether it is from like, sexual and romantic like conquest and influence, or, time off, career, solo career focus, or time off everything but the understanding of what your values are, your boundaries are, your needs are, and then kind of like let yourself, uncivilize yourself a little bit, like unlearn a few of the things that you've been taught by our ancestors who were very much trapped in patriarchy, right? So in order to have this conscious accountability, we have to like start by, unlearning a little bit, so we can then go into a place of understanding ourselves truly. I mean, when Socrates, like 400 BC or whatever it was, decided to stay in prison where he was placed unjustly and take the poison to show to his, fellow citizens that A, he was innocent, and B, he upheld the law even when the law was unjust, right? And everyone, from the guards to his students to his family, and even the jurors who had condemned him to die, expected him to run off and go to exile. When he stayed and took and made a point, took a stand, right? He gave us a clear understanding of what civic responsibility is, and of what, belief in the collective, belief in the law, but also what it means to be a man in that space, right? So that's so far from where we are now, where, everyone is chasing like the individual, advantage, individual success. Everything is like a part, I think, of the fragmentation is these decollectivizations, where we don't really know where we belong, what groups we belong in. So it's always like me, and men have lost themselves in part in this extreme individuality, right? That our system encourages, because it forces us to consume more, among other things.
Because it came out of a disconnect, and I think that's the invitation. And again, what we're creating in Sacred Sons, what I've created in Light Beings, is exact dedication to that. The first principle in
Community.
my practice is the first principle of my practice is know thyself, but I have it as know thy self, right? So the entirety of you, where it says, and then the first core value is honesty, because that honesty with the self brings us into a more comprehensive way of looking at the whole picture and what we're a part of. And I agree with you, the understanding of, because that's really what synergy represents, right? The idea of understanding each individual part being a part of something greater than itself, but every part is just as valuable as the whole, so that it doesn't become work yourself to death for the whole, and it doesn't become fuck the whole, I'm only going to do me. It becomes I recognize I'm a valuable component. I take care of myself to contribute all of my gifts to this all I'm a part of, and then the all of that holds the all of everyone's dedication, and that is where we are going. And that's what we're building in the Light Beings and Sacred Sons, and that's literally the dedication of my heart to this world. So even though I'm very much aware it will take time, we are very much on it, and we're witnessing all the loud distortions and misalignments in the world, and what some of the ones you've spoken to, and these are the things we're going to continue to evolve as we take these steps forward. That it's a clear sign of the times that the invitation is there. And if we can continue to live from the truth of ourselves, we'll continue to pick up that mantle and evolve this species accordingly. Return
to the body, return to physical contact, return to contests, exactly. and remember and understanding that this forging of one's character is work. Right? It's as much work as it is to get a PhD. It's as much work as it is, promoting your career. This idea that we have nowadays, that we're just born, ready-made, like Athena out of Zeus's head, is just so false. To become a proper man, and a proper woman, likewise, you have to work at it, right? You have to think about it and take time and understand and go against your first impulse and, go against ingrained habits and kind of rebirth a whole new you, which is not easy. And I agree. I think that, being able to do this in group, in community, in the ways that you provide, makes it much easier, right, than solitary practicing.
Yeah, because and for men specifically, there's an important dynamic of both, the individual solitude that's necessary, but also the community, so that men know that they're not alone and they don't go in that lone wolf individual mode. And obviously, it's true for everyone, having space to yourself, but also having community, and that's exactly correct. And the recognition of nature is so vital. The importance of really understanding that we are connected to everything in creation, and to really know how to get back to the remembrance of that foundation, especially being in nature, is such a powerful reminder for men. And so keeping that aspect of our roots and of our species alive, in my opinion, is such a vital component.
Yes, yes.
Such a vital component.
Yes, yeah. I agree. Hallelujah. Yeah. Yeah, because no matter what, if there is a climate crisis or a nuclear crisis or whatever there is, the people who will survive are the people who still have the skills to survive in nature, not in culture, right? So the people who are extremely adept at surviving online will not make it. Yeah. So I think that, nature does have balance and salvation, and, it is a place for men to gather again and, rediscover what they're called, how they can be authentic in a world that's so confused and lost and, chaotic and kind of slightly suicidal.
Yeah, because it leads to really, the contradiction of nature, because connection is something that's standard in all of creation. And whenever we feel like we're disconnected, it's because we're genuinely squeezing something off that's designed to flow a certain way. And I think about that all the time with emotions and the way the energy is designed to flow. And the more that we keep creating these containers, and then the more we keep bringing it all together for the integration, the more advanced our species will become in the healthiest way possible.
Yeah.
So it's really, really vital.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we'll improve our birth rate too in the process.
Legit.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you for coming. This is great. I heartily recommend Sacred Sons and all the groups out there, where men can meet men and find connection and find the heart of who they are without all the distractions of modern culture. So thank you for introducing us to your work. And everyone out there, thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. And until next week, keep speaking manhood and nature and consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
If I could make love incessantly, I would be God.